The Secret of the Underground Room by John Bellairs, Chapter 13. Johnny stood dead still, watching the evil, nightmarish face of the creature who stood before him. His lower jaw trembled, and he wanted to scream, but he found that he couldn't. He wanted to close his eyes and faint, but he couldn't do that either. Masterman's lips did not move, but Johnny heard an angry, sneering voice that echoed inside his brain. "Good evening, young man. Are you prepared to receive visitors? No? Then you must come and join me. You may not enjoy the darkness I am sending you to, where every hour will seem like a year of sleepless pain, but my poor fellow knights must be avenged somehow. Come along. I will not take no for an answer." With that, Masterman motioned for Johnny to step forward, and Johnny found that he had to obey. Stumbling stiffly out into the hall like a robot, he began to follow the beckoning eerie shape. Suddenly a door slammed. Father Higgins stood in the hall, glowering angrily, the holy water bottle in his hand. With a quick twist, he unscrewed the cap and flung the liquid into Masterman's face. An inhuman howl arose as the creature writhed and twisted. His body turned to a melting horror, and his face turned to a melting horror, and his body sagged and ran like water. In a few seconds, there was nothing there at all, except a faint scorch mark on the hall rug. Johnny rushed to Father Higgins and threw his arms around him. Humphrey and Fergie and Professor Childermass came rushing into the hall in their pajamas. They looked frightened and wild-eyed. "What in the name of heaven is going on?" raved the professor, as he stuck his glasses crookedly onto his nose. Johnny turned his tear-streaked face toward the professor, and in a flash the old man guessed. "Masterman!" he roared. "He's come back!" Father Higgins nodded solemnly. "At least he isn't using my body this time," he growled. "But poor John here almost got dragged away to God knows where." Father Higgins turned to Humphrey. "See here now," he said. "Roderick tells me you know something about magic. Can you figure out how that fiend managed to return?" Humphrey shook his head. "Offhand, I couldn't say," he replied. Unless... Suddenly he turned to Johnny. "Would you let me examine the clothes you were wearing the day you were in the underground room?" he asked excitedly. Johnny was startled, and he couldn't imagine what Humphrey was driving at. But he led him into his room. Except for underwear and socks, the clothes he had been wearing at bedtime were the ones he had worn in the tomb chamber. A red plaid shirt and brown corduroy pants. They lay draped over the chair next to the bed. Carefully, Humphrey examined the shirt. He peered into the pocket and put his hand inside the cuffs. Sighing, he put the shirt aside and went to work on the pants. Meanwhile, Father Higgins, Fergie, and the professor crowded into the room and stood watching curiously. "What in blazes do you expect to find?" snapped the professor. "Just be patient, brother," muttered Humphrey as he began running his forefinger inside of one of Johnny's pant cuffs. "If I'm right, then... Ha!" With that, Humphrey reached into the cuff and pulled something out. He turned to the others with his palm open before him. On it lay a tiny golden fish. "One of those!" gasped the professor. "I don't believe it. It must have landed on Johnny's cuff when Higgy broke one of the pieces of glass." Humphrey nodded. "I expect that is what happened. I remember now that you told me the piece of glass Father Higgins found had a little golden fish embroidered in it," he said. "What do we do with it?" asked Johnny. He was afraid that this would turn out to be one of those awful cursed objects that couldn't be gotten rid of. Humphrey smiled in a secretive way. "Let us all go downstairs to my basement laboratory while I unmagic this widget." Since he dabbled in alchemy and sorcery, Humphrey had a basement workshop that looked as if it belonged to a mad scientist. Bubbling retorts, racks of test tubes, spiraling glass tubes, and liquids of various colors dripping into beakers were everywhere, and on one marble-topped table was a small metal smelting furnace. The fire inside had been banked, but it was not out, and as the others stood watching, Humphrey used a pair of bellows to get the coals glowing. When the fire was going again, Humphrey picked up a pair of tweezers and used it to drop the tiny fish into the hole in the top of the furnace. Then he put the iron lid on the hole and stood humming quietly. Gold melts at a fairly low temperature, so he didn't have long to wait. Finally, he opened up the furnace again and peeked inside. "Ah!" he said. "Perfect! and he reached in carefully with a long-handled pair of tongs to pull out a shapeless blob of yellow metal. Smiling, Humphrey laid the blob on the marble and let it cool. "There," he said, "if you change an amulet's shape, the magic force runs out of it. At least, that is what the great experts say. To be doubly sure, we'll take this thing down to the bridge and put it in a matchbox and pitch it into the river." "I hope this really will be the end," sighed the professor. "My heart isn't quite as strong as it used to be." "Neither is mine," added Johnny, shuddering slightly, and we'll pause there.